r/AskReddit. Jupiter Uranus says, Redditors have witnessed something that you'll absolutely never forget. What was it? Explorthus says, 40 years ago, Sockle Freeway, on my way to work. Close to or in the fast lane. Traffic starts slowing up. I catch a motorcycle rider in my peripheral vision to my right not paying attention. Cars are virtually dead stopped. He rear-ended a car doing probably 65. Head over heels, what appeared to be 100 somersaults as he bounced all over the freeway. I almost threw up when I saw it. Fast forward a few years, I'm at work somehow chatting with a group of co-workers. One of the co-workers that I had seen but didn't know, also missing his right arm, was in the discussion. After some discovery, we both came to the conclusion that it was him that was the motorcycle rider. Yikes. I figured after that he was dead. Cosmos _ says, I personally would have been really comforted to know that he made it, despite his loss. Shout at _devil says, so that was you. Oh man, I'm so glad to know after all these years that you made it. Obviously, it's sad that you lost your head, but other than that I'll say you came out pretty unscathed. Plasmaza60 says, was at London Heathrow Airport and was waiting in customs. I saw an Asian woman about mid-early 30s sprint towards the express passport line to catch up with family, and one of her boobs popped out of her shirt. Miss Mim says, not what I was expecting lol. Plasmaza60 says, oh believe me that's not what I was expecting either. Weird part was she just slipped it back in, like not embarrassed or anything. Unflapperded says, Tampa, Florida 2015. A man and a woman were arguing in the parking lot of a bowling alley. The man shot the woman in the head, turned the gun on himself, and pulled the trigger too. The woman died, and the man was barely alive. Still not sure if he died. I had front row seat as everything unfolded about 20 feet in front of me. I was so stunned. It happened so suddenly. I'll never forget watching the life drop out of both of their bodies and the woman's lifeless gaze. Phenomenal Hound says, while working in the pulmonary ward at the university hospital in my town, I got to know this older man in his mid to late 70s whom I ended up having this grandpa/grandson relation with. We could joke about pretty much anything. The darker, the better. Once I came into his room with all his kids and grandchildren present, he said to me, alright, hard. So they haven't fired you yet? I replied, and you're still breathing? We both laughed. His family had this big WTF look on their faces, not understanding anything going on between us. Perhaps a month and a half later, I was working a night shift. And we always visit the patients when we start our shifts to let them know who's working that night. He was sitting on his bed eating a sandwich watching the news on the television. This was around 2200 hours, 10 PM. He seemed fine and everything was great. We talked and laughed, and I told him that I'd come back in a few hours and that he'd call if he needed anything. At 2 AM I made another round to his and the others' room to literally make sure that they are all breathing. I found him hyperventilating on the bed. I pressed the alarm button and 2 other nurses came running. I sat down next to him. He took my hand and squeezed it hard. He looked at me as he started to tear up, obviously scared. Perhaps a minute later his heart stopped and he died right in front of me. I've seen a bit of death in my lifetime, but after this incident, I quit my job and never looked back. I still miss him after all these years. Mitra Botbuk says, I hope you take solace with the fact that he didn't die alone surrounded by medical professionals. He had a friend holding his hand. Almond Flavorednitz says, I hope I have a friend like you when I die. Tobot Naus says, watching my mom get electrocuted by running over the cord with a lawnmower. That shit will live with me forever. For me it was half watching my mom sizzling away, smoke was coming from her hands and her hair, and yelping because the force/power of the electric shock wouldn't let her scream, and half the complete lack of help from my neighbors. I was maybe 6 years old and was screaming for help. My neighbors all just stared at me but no one helped. I even remember a guy walking by with his dog while I was screaming and pleading that my mom was dying and I needed help, and he just kept on walking. I lived in a nice suburb in a nice city and we were on good terms with all of our neighbors. Taught me very early on that there is no guarantee people will help you, even if they see what's going on. Lead to a bit of a hero complex where, when I see someone in trouble, I immediately run to help regardless of risks to my safety. This isn't me trying to boast, but rather that I have a knee-jerk reaction now to people in distress. BC, I know what it's like to ask for help and get zero response. She survived, but had a lot of burns and some heart problems afterwards. Nobanob says, she may have taken the shock, but a hero was born from that moment. The world needs more heroes. r/AskReddit. Zilama says, spouses of Reddit, what's the funniest thing you've realized about marriage? Headdrag1440 says, you really do have to pick your battles. There are little things you just gotta live with if you want to be happier. Ethel Thales says, being right is so much less important than it used to be. Enshu says, I love my spouse more than anything in the world, but I'm so thankful that we do not work together. If doing any projects around the house such as hanging a shelf or curtain rod is any indication of how that would go, it is best that she is a banker and I'm a healthcare worker. Academic_smell says, I met my long-term partner at work, both HCWS, and we very rarely have to work together now, but based on how projects go at home, those occurrences being rare is a very good thing. Throw me away Puppy says, my wife and I both own businesses. There is a reason we don't own one business together. Tried that once, and after 6 months decided we should each do our own thing. On Lired the headline says, hair. OMG, how is it I'm bald and she's got so much? She's got a full head of hair and still I find her hair everywhere else in the house. How does her hair get around my balls or in my ass? Nothing makes sense anymore. I could make a pet cat out of the hair balls I've found. Not to mention the monsters I've had to pull out of the sink drain. HKD001 says, I've told my wife about how her hair that gets around my balls and in my butt crack. She didn't believe me until I showed her. Blobfish_blue says, this is a conversation I have with my husband a lot, usually after he discovers another of my hairs in his underwear. I have a thyroid condition, so the fact I'm not bald is miraculous. Miss Mormy says, half our communication is just rehashing the same inside jokes we've had for decades. And they are still terrible, but also the best thing ever. More Spores says, just how many times you can have the same conversation. Kitterfly77 says, as the years go on, you look more and more like each other. Bored says, and start to get the same ailments. But Earthen Beer says, we joke that we need to take turns limping in public, else it looks like we had a car accident. Prestigious_ide7473 says, you'll spend years rehashing the same arguments, that is, how someone drives, how to raise kids, how to dress, etc. Kitterfly77 says, yep. People considering marriage need to know whatever you argue about will be different variations of the same disagreement for the rest of your ever-loving life. Choose wisely. Insert caffeine says, we start to act like each other. Now we are both the loud guy at the sports bar, just like him. We both talk to the cat the same way, and we both say the same snarky comments when we are driving. He got those from me. Can't Jeththis right 22 says, That look we give one another. Whether in public, in front of our friends or family, watching TV, if we give each other that look we know exactly what the other thinks based off of the situation. It's gotten so good we have almost started to laugh because we in sync turn to one another to give that look. I don't know when it started or how, but it's iconic to me. Barbara One Breen says, there's always one spouse who has a higher tolerance for, let's call it clutter, than the other. That's me in my marriage. I'm 80% of the time the one who gets asked to put this away or help clean that. It's frustrating for me because I just want to sit on the couch. It's frustrating for my wife because she feels like she always has to ask me before I'll do anything. Which isn't true, my timetable is just calibrated differently than hers. Noise a Child says that about 90% of all our fighting revolves around which way we go somewhere via Google Maps. The Grey Beast says this. Early in our marriage, why did you go this way? Other way is better. Next time I start to go the other way. Why are you going this way? Last time you said it was better. With derision, not on the 3rd of the month, when there is a full moon, our cat's in heat, and over 4 people are on the International Space Station at once. Kindgrub 1007 says, it's much easier than the miserable folks want you to believe. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.